challenges that lie ahead. We know there are things that still need to change in the energy sector, so that we're reflective of today's society rather than some old-fashioned thing that was relevant quite a long time ago. So what practical steps should we be taking? Who should be taking the lead? And where can we look for inspiration? So our final session this afternoon is a panel session to think about these things. It'll be chaired by Georgina Worrall, who's head of Powerful Women. And I know Georgina wants to say a few words about Powerful Women herself, so I will let her come and take over and do that. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I will be very brief and then I will bring the rest of the panel up. I just wanted to make those of you who might not know Powerful Women, just let you know what we're about. So we are a professional initiative working towards a gender-balanced, diverse and inclusive UK energy sector. We were founded in 2014 by Baroness Verma, who was Energy Minister at the time. And our target is that by 2030, at least 40% of women will be in middle management and leadership roles. We have no membership fee, so if you are interested in following Powerful Women, you can subscribe to our newsletter, you can follow us on LinkedIn, and we are all about challenging the sector, challenging leaders, and supporting women. And on that note, I'm now going to bring the rest of my panellists up, and we're going to have a conversation around the future of EDI. So I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Aileen, Shini and Sean. We had a briefing call ahead of this event to have a discussion around what we would discuss within this session, and we all felt that there still needs to be a big discussion around engagement, attraction and retention. So that's what we are going to be discussing on this panel, and I'll be asking each panellist a section of questions, and then we would love to open it up to the floor for you to either join in the debate or ask any questions. So I'm going to get each of the panellists just to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Aileen.
Hi, my name is Aileen. I work for Innovate UK, UKERC. I actually work in the Strategic Innovation Fund for Ofgem. So I work as an EDI advocate, as well as an impact and evaluation program manager and internal monitoring officer for all the projects that we fund within the program. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Dr. Shini Somara. I am originally a mechanical engineer and fluid dynamicist. I have moved from a career in engineering to a career in media as an engineering communicator. I've published 7 books. The latest is called Engineers Making a Difference, for an 11+ audience, designed to change and update the public perception of engineering. And I'm a real advocate for democratizing STEM and trying to encourage a widening participation in STEM, as someone who ticks a couple of boxes when it comes to being in a minority.
Hi, my name is Sean McQuaid. I represent TIDE community. TIDE stands for Transition Through Inclusivity, Diversity for Equity. And we're very similar to the Cowrie. In fact, I know Richard Arefo. We go back, his wife and my wife are besties from university. So I've known him as a young lad. And so what we're doing is trying to raise funds for undergraduates to go to university from underserved communities relating to net zero STEM undergraduate subjects. So the difference between what Richard and I were doing, which we set up at almost exactly the same time and didn't talk to each other about this, interestingly. His is about serving the Black community and any subject. Ours is about underserved communities in general, including BAME, relating to specifically net zero and science subjects.
So, Shini, if we can start with you and talking about engagement. You've obviously referenced your book, Making a Difference, and in there it's all about breaking down stereotypes. So how can we kind of communicate to the energy sector that it is an exciting place to work?
I think we've heard so much about mentoring, and I think role modeling is so crucial. In 2007, I was at the United Nations headquarters, New York, and I was talking about the importance of role models, because as someone that has kind of navigated a career in television and also created content for digital platforms, I think the most engaging thing for future generations in STEM is seeing who they can be. You know, I've heard many times, you can't be it if you can't see it. We've heard it so many times that often these terms go over our heads, but it's the most powerful thing, I think, and it actually turns it over to many of you in the audience, because as people in the energy sector or in any other sector of STEM, you are the voices of the industry, and unless we hear from you, we can't possibly aspire to be like you. I mean, I graduated at a time where there were no women in engineering, and certainly far less people of colour in engineering. And I didn't even think to have mentors, because there was no one like me. Today, I know that mentors don't have to be like me. Mentors can come in all shapes and sizes. And so I do think that communication is key. Communicating what you do, feeling comfortable about opening up about your job, and just showing people what they could do in their futures is the most effective way.
And in terms of communication, I think the energy sector can fall foul of using complex language that communities don't understand. Why do you think the use of language is so important in trying to engage people to come into this sector?
It's all about making it unintimidating. So much of my work has been about how to translate very complex subjects into something that is engaging and relatable and just not scary. I mean, I hosted a series on, well, it's now living on YouTube, called Crash Course Physics, and so much effort and so much of the budget was put on creating friendly animations and just using language that is kind of colloquial and taking the intimidation out of it. I think many people in STEM, we pride ourselves on how smart we are and how much we've attained academically, and we all have a right to that, because it is difficult, often studying STEM. But I think for me, the greatest skill that I've had to learn myself is how to translate that complex language that does go over a lot of people's heads and turn it into a language that we can easily engage with. And it's getting more and more complicated as time goes on because of social media. You know, often you only have a couple of seconds to engage young people on TikTok, whatever. I struggle with TikTok. It's a scary app for me because I'm not that generation, but we have to create content that appeals to young people, which is why my first books started for an audience age 5 to 7, because, you know, the needle wasn't changing. Me talking at conferences for young women who had already had to choose whether they go into science or art at the age of 13 because of the educational system. So it's really, I've had a lot of backlash of, oh, you were in engineering, you did your PhD in engineering, and now you're in media, and you're dumbing down what engineers do. And it's like, well, I'd rather dumb down than it not reach anyone at all, you know? So.
And in terms of reach and platforms and social media and that engagement with the future generations, what platforms have you found kind of to be most productive in terms of getting the messaging out?
Well, I've been in the media industry now for about 20 years. And it's changed a lot. I mean, the hardware is radically changed. Television was the main form, you know. I don't know how many of you grew up with Tomorrow's World, but that's what inspired me. I loved watching that with my dad. who's an engineer and my first and foremost source of inspiration into engineering. But I loved a program like that, where someone who is an expert in engineering and someone who's a kid could, you know, engage at the same time. So television was the main form of inspiration into STEM, but, you know, that's changed drastically now. Now it's all about social media. You've got a swathe of apps from TikTok to Instagram. LinkedIn has really become very powerful amongst young people because they're realizing they can network and find mentors that way. And I don't know if anyone's noticed, but LinkedIn has become a bit more like social media, and less very highbrow and very professional. It's become a bit more of a social tool. And what was I going to say? TikTok, social media, and people are watching content on demand now. So I mean, we're all guilty of it. If you want to learn how to do something, you go on YouTube and you search for that video that's going to tell you how to fix your boiler and things. And I think it's really important that we get honest that the way we are educating future generations of people in STEM is changing. And one of the main sources, I mean, the number one search engine amongst current generations is TikTok. And we also have to get very honest about the fact that young people are going for their actual education through YouTube and are taking school maybe less seriously, or they're considering it more like a chore, whereas they enjoy learning on their own through tools like YouTube.
And Sean, if I can come to you now in terms of attraction. So last year, Powerful Women collaborated with National Grid on the Race to Net Zero report, and within there, National Grid had cited that by 2050, we're going to need around 400,000 new jobs to meet the energy transition needs. 260,000 of those jobs don't exist, and 140,000 of those jobs will be people leaving the workforce. So through your role with Tide, how can the sector attract talent to sort of meet that skills gap?
Well, it's funny you should talk about that, but we put a paper into the UKERC last week in the newsletter, which was, you've heard of the NHS, what about the PHS, which is the Planetary Health Service? I was making analogies between them. And you talk about the 260,000. We're talking 1.3 million, actually, in terms of the green sector as being protected. So, I mean, those are enormous numbers, absolutely enormous numbers. And if you go into schools, and I've been doing this with Engineering UK, talking about climate education and so on, you'll find that there is not anywhere near the understanding as to what it is in terms of opportunities that lie for them. What we can remember is by 2050, those children that are in those schools are actually going to be in their 40s, and they're going to be the senior engineers, they're going to be the senior policy makers, they're going to be the influencers, they're going to be people who are going to be making decisions and so on. And they need to know right now that there is these wonderful opportunities for them to be able to do something about this. And it requires them to apply themselves at school to do that. Now, okay, how do we draw that talent into something like the energy industry? Well, it all goes right the way back to primary school, to be frank. What we need to do is right from the early stages is to have them animated in the same way as a number of us around there. Well, maybe not so many of you now, but you know, in 1969, I sat there and watched Louis Armstrong go onto the moon, to land on the moon. I know, and that was just absolutely amazing. If you talk to many people of my generation, that moonshot was the thing that inspired us to do so many things. And of course, behind that, as you say, tomorrow's world and so on. We need culturally those kinds of things, and we need culturally be able to encourage, especially young girls at the age of 10 or 11, to when they go into secondary school and all of a sudden them not being the big year sixes and they're now the little year sevens, is for them to hold on to a form of mental resilience and a scientific curiosity. So key to all this is to actually do something about the national curriculum on climate education so that those young people are prepared and ready to go to university to study the right things. And then in terms of that pipeline, that talent, that's where we come in with the tide, is the whole point, is what we made wrong about the energy system that we have. The tide was sprung from a survey that was done within the energy industry, which showed that we were woefully poorly represented. The Bevan, for example, was poorly represented within the energy industry. And so myself and another person called Ron Daniel, who is in the industry as well, decided the thing you needed to do was to get the pipeline right, because there's no way that we're going to have BAME community people of color on the boards tomorrow because we decide to put some EDI initiatives in place, because we don't have them coming through the pipeline. The pipeline is the key, and therefore we need to make sure the pipeline is diverse and inclusive, and then we will get the right talent come through. That is our view anyway.
And expanding further on that sort of pipeline conversation, when it comes to sort of underrepresented communities and groups, how can we make them feel brave enough when they enter the sector? How can we make them feel brave enough and confident enough to feel that they belong?
That's a very good question. One of the things that we've been discussing within Tide is it's not good enough to, for example, go out, raise the money and then just rock up at some of the schools and say, here's some money and for you to go to university. Number one, they need to know. So we need to educate, we need to do the outreach, which I talked about earlier. But the other thing is that if you can imagine, what we're hoping to do is to raise, say, 10 million from industry, 10 million from government or equivalents, put 300 people through every year to 1,000 at any one time would be at university. And these are not big numbers. So I talked about 1.3 million, but they're still significant numbers. Well, 2 or 3 will end up in Strathclyde, 4 or 5 maybe down in Exeter. They again be isolated. So what we're thinking of doing is putting together a summer school. So they all come together and then they can see that they're actually part of a large community addressing this issue of net zero. Number one, so we do that, and mentorship programs, all the sorts of things you were talking about earlier. But one of the problems we had within the energy industry of your, if you like, the oil and gas industry, is the leaky pipeline. So we lost a lot of people. When I started my career, it was fairly equal in terms of men and women coming into the companies. But by the time I got to my 40s, a lot of the women had pulled away. And the reason for that was the choice they made. We know all the stories behind that and whether they get supported. Same thing would be true with respect to all the communities. We need to support to make sure the pipeline is not leaky. So all the EDI initiatives that we're talking about now are all appropriate. But there probably are some other ones to think about in terms of socializing. It was a wonderful example we had up there with the outdoors making a big difference. Those sorts of social contacts are extremely important. And back in the 80s, when I started my career, socializing meant going to the pub and getting drunk with your mates. Now, there's many people that wouldn't even dream going into a pub because of maybe religion, because of they're just not drinkers. So we need to think carefully about how we actually do that socializing program, with cafes and activities and sports. And I think the healthiest companies I've been in have been the ones which have actually got quite a healthy sports and social club, or whatever you want to call it, where it's very inclusive.
And with your sort of sector experience that you've got, what do you see is the role of leaders of companies to kind of attract talent and encourage people to come into the sector? Yes.
So if we're talking about talent which is related to EDI, again, so we're talking about trying to make sure that we have a balanced community. I think CEOs or C-suite professionals should be thinking about the profile that they portray outside. I think that new hires today think very carefully about where they want to go. I was talking to some that had recently come out of the city and are now working in the net zero industry. They have, they're very keen on having a function or a purpose, having a purpose to what they're doing with their job. It isn't a case of, this is a good job, it gives me good money. They want more than that. They want quality of life, they want the money, but they also want to feel they have a purpose in life. And I think that the C-suite needs to portray that. And there's a couple of ways they can do that. One is to actually walk the walk, which is, for example, you could have, you make sure that you have an EDI champion on your board, and try to encourage somebody that's not from the BAME community to be that EDI champion. Often you'll find that you've got one or two. You might have a few minorities in a small company, and then they get followed a buttonhole to say, will you be the EDI champion? No, leave them to get on with pursuing their careers, and try to bring in more of these sort of, people like myself, I suppose, to be able to be champions for those sorts of things. So it gets taken seriously. So at the board level. The other thing is for them to persuade the institutes associated with their companies. So, I mean, the Energy Institute and all the others, there are hundreds and hundreds of industries in the UK. Get them to think carefully about actually having EDI champions on their executive, on their councils, and to have that as set up charters or statements of intent or codes of ethics, all those kinds of codes, which we've got lovely examples of in various institutes, but they're not in all of them. If you do that, and then people feel that they can belong to those organizations, they're less likely to end up being going out of a leaky pipeline.
And then, Aileen, if I can come to you in terms of retention and the work that Innovation UK does, can you share some insights on how Ofgem's FIS programme attracts and retains talent, and talk about any other initiatives that are good at retaining talent?
In terms of Ofgem, we are currently actually doing an ideation competition, which allows people to actually bring their innovative ideas to my programme. What does that mean for you? You don't necessarily need to be related to any licensed network, because SIF is designed to involve people that only belong to a licensed network. So that's opened on the 8th of March and it starts on the 27th. So this is like a shout out to all innovators and anyone that's in the energy sector. Precisely, even the young people are welcome to this. So in terms of what Innovate UK does, we are investing, involving, as well as welcoming anyone from any background, whether be they're young, old, medium, small, medium enterprises. And we have a competition called Young Innovators. This encompasses people from the ages of 18 to 30 to date. We've had 250 young people apply to this, and 28 of them are actually in the energy sector out of the 250 that we've had. The other programs that we run are the Future Leadership Fellowship, and that's round 9 at the moment. This is to ensure that we are getting future leaders, this is the young people, to come present to us what they can give Innovate UK, UKERC. I'm sure you've seen quite a few initiatives where UKERC are supporting. So again, these are some of the initiatives that we have in the organisation.
And then, in your opinion, how can companies inspire and engage the younger generation to pursue a career in the sector, considering the existing skills gaps that we've referenced?
Well, I'm a bit of an analogy person. So I originally come from Zimbabwe, Harare to be precise. So my history is not in engineering. So I've heard quite a lot of people say they're engineers, but that does not mean I'm unable to enter the energy sector. I had many relatable models through my journey, which is why you see me here. My history comes from doing nursing and midwifery, which is why you'll probably see there was a lot of disproportionate in COVID-19, that quite a lot of underrepresented individuals did unfortunately lose their lives to COVID, because that's where we're welcome. My shout out to the energy sector is make it a welcoming environment, where people feel they belong, where people feel that no matter what colour, what age, disability or inability they have, they're welcome to come into the sector. The reason why most people that look like me go to the NHS is we feel welcome there. And my sisters are 2 examples of people that have gone to an industry because it welcomes them. And I can go one further. My own mother has an MBA in procurement, but because she was not welcome in various industries, she's ended up being a carer because that's where she's welcome. And I also ask you all to minimize the jargon, make it understandable, use more inclusive language that everybody can understand to make them feel that they can come into the industry and make that difference. Thank you.
And actually, that's a really great segue into sort of opening it up to the floor. We didn't want this just to be a panel session about all of us speaking. We wanted to open it up for discussions, for questions, for debate. So it is now an opportunity for everybody to join in this discussion.
Hello, Sarah BT, WPC Energy. There are currently 4 universities in the UK that do not allow energy companies to their recruitment fairs because they say it sort of contravenes their sort of ethical policies, etc. And we've got this massive task ahead of us with transitioning to a lower carbon system. How do we turn that narrative around? How do we attract not just people of different diversities, but youth in general to our industry when it feels like we're sort of under attack at times?
Sean, do you want to start with that with your sector experience?
Yeah, it does feel like we are under attack, and you know, to some degree, some of it's deserved, some of it's not. It always is the case that it's grey, it's never black and white. I think broadly speaking, the young people within England or within the UK won't be interested in getting involved in oil and gas. If you then question them further, if you ask them, would you be interested in exploring for new oil in the North Sea? Or would you be interested in making sure the oil that we have said that we would produce to keep the lights on? They're 2 different questions and 2 different roles that they have. So you could be somebody who's a reservoir engineer that's managing one of the big fields which are on the ramp down. It's going to happen. But you could actually be a seismic explorer exploring for new oil off the west coast of Africa. They're two very different roles, and they've got different responsibilities, and ethically people will take different positions for them. I think we're always going to have that problem with homegrown talent from now on with respect to the oil and gas industry. They'll be happy to go into the low carbon energy, but not so much in the oil industry. And it is a challenge because just like the, what do you call it, the baby boomers or whatever, the demographics for the oil and gas industry is such that, you know, there's a conveyor belt, and I'm, you know, part of that bump that's going on. There's very few people that's coming in behind it. And yet, we need these lights on, and there are plenty of diesel cars out there at the moment. So it is a transition. I mean, if you look at the IEA, they're saying that it should go down to 50% of the, you know, the production that we're having presently. And so there is justification for people to do that. I think if you talk to within BP, for example, and other companies, they're seeing their young people not just doing oil and gas, but also getting involved in other things like hydrogen or you know, all sorts of geothermal and all sorts of things. Yeah, tough one. It's a tough one. But I think that if people feel that they're part of the transition, they understand the transition, they'll be able to justify their minds and make rational decisions and not irrational. And that all comes about by doing the right educate, providing them with the right resources and the right information for them to make the right decisions.
And if I can expand on that, I think energy companies are really bad about saying what they're doing well at and what they are doing to meet climate change and the energy transition. And I think they also need to, everyone's on the same page. The younger generation want to be tackling climate change. The energy companies want to be tackling climate change. But I don't think energy companies are very good at necessarily communicating all of the jobs that are on offer to those future generations and bringing them in and saying, you want to change climate change, come and work for us, and here are the ways that you can change climate change and you can make an impact and you can make a difference. So I do think there is a role for energy companies to actually communicate the various different jobs that they can offer.
I think also,
I was going to say it's also about culture and alignment. So if you understand your stakeholder, in this case, you know, let's say they are a university and they are very much into sustainability, you know, if you're going to align your organizational culture into the aspirations of the younger generation, then maybe it can work very easily. Thanks.
I was going to say, there's again been a lot of talk about communication, but how much budget is realistically allocated to communicating and really tightening up the company's brand identity? There are companies that I know that really spend a lot of money on how they look to the public. Big engineering companies that and it's not even about spending the money, it's just about the thoughtfulness of how you're coming across to the public. And I think there's a general trend in the UK that not much money is spent on communication, and it's not seen as something that is important, but actually it's crucial. It's the bridge between your company and how people perceive you. So it's absolutely crucial to take an interest and care in how you come across to your customers. Also, I was trying to find the language to express this, but it's really interesting, one of your questions where you were asking about the underrepresented. And I really wanted to sort of interject, because I've heard a lot today about initiatives where you're kind of grouping BAME together and like all these different minorities together. But I just don't think that we need to convince people who are in ethnic minorities of the things that we communicate in those gatherings. I think we you know, that's not to say that we don't need to encourage minorities to consider careers in STEM, and or minorities to see others who have gone into careers in STEM. That's all great by having these gatherings. I think it's so important for underrepresented people to have a voice to the majority. It's the majority that needs to be, it's their attitudes that need to be changed, not the minorities. The minorities want to progress. They want to have, you know, develop their careers, make something of themselves, change their lives, you know, improve the quality of where they've come from, right? But if they are not welcome in the majority communities, they're not going to get anywhere. And we're, you know, we're not heard. So I'm very passionate about this, because, you know, if you're not, how are we going to have any opportunity if we are not changing people's attitudes towards us being there? You know, we don't want to be token minority people. We don't want to be representing, you know, we want to be integrated. We want our opinions to count. We want our education to have an impact. And, you know, so actually we should be gathering people together that aren't, don't know anything about us. You know, I think that's key.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A very interesting panel. Rocio Diaz from Imperial College. And I wanted to make a comment about what you mentioned in terms of early education. We have a project that is called Genesis. Genesis is funded by the European Commission. It's a Horizon project, but because it was awarded during the transition of the negotiations with Brexit, so it is actually funded by UKERC. So in this project, we are comparing several countries in Europe with other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and UK is also included, about the education system. So we are actually reviewing the books for primary, secondary, middle, just before entering university levels between these countries. And honestly, it's appalling to see the level in the UK compared, for example, with Poland or with Italy. It is energy, it's almost not in the books. It's much from the point of view of physics rather than to society or including EDI and gender issues. So this is something that we are going to produce a report because it is really interesting to see, and again, to compare this with some sub-Saharan African countries. An additional point, I think, with EDI, and especially for research, in the previous session, we heard about data collection and these issues. Companies in the UK that also have influence in the Global South, and me also, I have experience being a mentor in the Global South. And indeed, EDI, we do not talk about decolonizing our research, our data, and also the intervention of some of the companies in the Global South. I think this is something really important to also bring it to the EDI, because we cannot avoid it. There is migration, there is a movement of people around different countries. So we have to think about this also, and how we can really incorporate it within the companies, within research, and how much we influence or we really impact in terms of these aspects. Thank you.
Did anyone want to, I know it wasn't a question, but did anyone want to comment on?
Well, I'll just bounce a little bit back. It's rather interesting what you're talking about, that I'm also tied as a member of what's called the NCEAP, which is the National Climate Education Action Plan. It's been run out of the University of Reading, and it's a group which includes everything from sort of the Eden Project and the Natural History Museum to the Royal Meteorological Society, Engineering UK, and 20 or 30 other organizations. It's a self-defined group, if you like, but they're looking at climate education and the curriculum, how we actually reshape the curriculum going forward. And some of your comments may well be useful in that regard, and may I urge you to have a look that up and see if you want to get involved.
Can I just add, with my media hat on, that I'm really aware that younger generations are so knowledgeable of how bad the climate situation is. That's what I have absorbed from many of the groups of young people that I talk to and the audiences that I reach through my work, is that they are starkly aware of how bad the climate situation is. In fact, I remember one girl talking to me about how she's scared at night because of a image she has of a very skinny polar bear floating on a tiny piece of ice. So I think younger generations have had so much media content about, it's in the news when we have all these extreme weather events and disasters here and like natural disasters everywhere. So I think they are aware of the problem, but what we're trying to tackle with an EDI lens is how we empower them to find solutions. So that's what I think, that's why I'm here, because I'm trying to, I'm trying to rack my brain. How do we encourage an inclusive cohort of people to innovate for the problems that we face? And that's, I think, where we're stuck, because we just can't find that talent. We've got a skills gap. So how do we fill that gap?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this business of how we educate our young, we need to give them a curriculum of hope, not despair. So when we're talking about, talking about polar bears on shrinking pieces of ice, we need to say, no, you can do something about it. And so, for example, the Engineering UK are actually piloting at the moment a set of lectures or talks on called Tackling Climate Change. Okay, so it's explicitly about explaining, here's what the problem is, and here are the engineering solutions to climate change. It's only halfway there because you have to think about the political solutions and how you persuade people to actually do some of this stuff, but at least it's kind of a step in the right direction.
Just to add on to the making the future knowledgeable in terms of climate change, we also do have a No Limits program, which actually works very closely with National Gas, and they are National Grid. My bad. National Grid. They've changed their names a few times, so apologies. National Grid, and they have some apprenticeships out at the moment. God. They've got some apprenticeships at the moment, and obviously I would probably signpost a few of the young people that you have, that maybe that could be an avenue for them to enter the energy sector. And yeah.
That's another thing. I had a very academic route into engineering, and lo and behold, I'm not in full-time engineering now. And when I wrote my book that has 46 contemporary engineers in it, very diverse spread of engineers from many different sectors of engineering, I was very keen to highlight that university is not the only way into engineering or STEM. And, we have many stigmas and biases and stereotypes to break down. And one of them is that to go into STEM, you do not have to be a genius at maths, physics, chemistry, and biology. Apprenticeships are amazing. T-levels are amazing. After interviewing engineers that took an apprenticeship route into engineering, I just was thinking, why didn't I do that? Because, this concept of earning while you're learning, and the reason why I didn't is because I didn't want people to think I wasn't very bright by choosing the apprenticeship route, because it's seen as like, I don't know, kind of manual labor. Actually, it's a really cutting edge way to get into the sector. So, and I've, as Pro-Chancellor of Brunel University now, I know firsthand that running apprenticeship programs, degree apprenticeship programs, is a nightmare for universities. So what would be fantastic is to change that and make apprenticeships easier, because something like engineering is a very practical, hands-on kind of profession. It's perfect for those kinds of students that don't want to go down a conventional schooling route. It's actually really fun doing engineering. We need to communicate that.
Yeah, and this was one of the reasons why Powerful Women last year put together a social media campaign called Empower Her in Energy, for exactly this reason, that the energy companies that we engage with within Powerful Women came together to spotlight the apprenticeship schemes within their own companies. We did some lived experience sort of live reels about what a day in the life looks like for an apprentice. And it was primarily targeted at women aged 16 to 21 to, exactly this, tell them that there's another route into the energy sector. It doesn't necessarily have to be through that traditional academic route. And we ran the campaign for 6 weeks, and we got 42 million hits off that campaign in that 6 weeks. That just showed you what, back to that conversation about using the right platforms. We did it. We used Snapchat, we used TikTok, we used Instagram. And back there you go. There's an example of a campaign that ran for 6 weeks, had 42 million engagement and hope. And for one company, they saw a 300% increase on their apprenticeship recruitment. So back to that thing of, we definitely as a sector need to look at going wider than that traditional recruitment pool to bring in talent, diverse talent, and talent that have a skill set that is going to be valued to the energy sector, and not this kind of what I call plug and play mentality that I think there is within the sector, that you have to have somebody who's got sector experience. I don't think you necessarily need to look at that. I think you need to look at what are the skills that are needed for that job. Do they really need to have industry experience, or will their line manager be able to, or somebody else within the team be able to bring the industry knowledge that they might not have. So I think there is a whole thing about just changing that whole recruitment modelling within the sector.
Again, you're also going right back to role modelling again. You're just seeing it on a mass platform.
Hi, Patricia Thornley. I lead the UK Supergen Bioenergy Hub, and I want to pick up on the discussion we're having around international and education and role models and empowerment. One of the projects we've been running over the last year is called Global Bioenergy Stories, where we are sending local artists into school communities in Africa, in South America, and in Southeast Asia to work with school children on what their vision is of a sustainable future and how we can actually work together to build that. And as I've been listening to some of the comments made in the last sort of 10, 15 minutes, I've been thinking, are there things that we can learn from other cultures and how things are done in other countries about how to bring people together and how to be more inclusive is part of the symptomatic problem that we have around how we in Western Europe have structured things?
I think it's a brilliant question, actually. Off the top of my head, there are many that I can think of, but I once did a kind of a dating, how do you call it? I did sort of a dating exercise, speed dating exercise for the Horizon program, whereas I got up and I said that these are the things I'm interested in researching, and part of it was tied in STEM and education and so on. And I got a phone call from a chap in Portugal in a block of flats, and he was saying that they were putting together their own sort of net zero self-help group with this block of flats. And it sort of struck me that, for example, you know, in his particular situation, there's much more of a community spirit within that particular area. And, you know, they were coming up with all sorts of initiatives, whether it be allotments or whether, you know, maybe they'll be thinking about ground source heat pumps and things like that. But I did get the feeling that there's no way that would have been, I may be wrong, and I hope somebody can contradict me, but it's not something I would expect to happen in England. So you're right. Maybe there are examples of initiatives and things that we could learn a lot from.
If I could touch on the culture aspect, being someone that comes from a cultured background, when you say culture, I think it's a very vast topic to the point where I don't think we've got enough years in this room to channel into those cultures, because in my own country, we have quite a lot of different cultures. So it all depends on what the end goal is to actually situate you into the correct like environment to get the results that you would like to get. Because I can't even pinpoint where I could say in Zimbabwe, please go here, or even in the 54 African states. So that's my contribution to that. It's a difficult one.
I'm going to talk about two things because it's a subject that I could talk forever on. The first thing is an example, and I'll let you take away from it what you want. An engineer I was interviewing for my book, a female Black engineer, is from Jamaica. And she loves cooking. And one evening she made a very traditional Jamaican meal, as she does very often. And she had some leftovers. And she, the next day, put those leftovers in a Tupperware and took it to work for lunch. And then when she was at work in their communal kitchen, she got her Jamaican lunch out of the fridge. And she actually thought, do you know what? I'm not going to warm it up in the microwave. Because I don't want to smell the kitchen out, and I don't want to draw attention to the fact that my food uses a lot of spices and is very different. She did not want to draw attention to her differences. And several months or weeks later, the company decided to hold a World Food Day where all the employees were encouraged to bring their traditional food to work. And on that day, everybody was trying different foods, and there was conversation sparked up about the way they cook and what they eat and what's symbolic. And it was like a real opportunity to learn about each other's different cultures. And from that day, she was so proud to bring in her cooking because people knew about her cooking, they loved her cooking, they wanted to try it. And there was this real like opening up of just being different. And I really believe that ED&I issues can be partially solved by allowing people's differences to make a difference. Because in my own personal experience of being one of no women of colour in engineering when I graduated, I was trying to be someone I wasn't to try and fit in. And that didn't work very well at all, to the point where I was just like, I cannot be someone that I am not. And back then, there was no culture of let's celebrate people's differences. And I think that is at the core of ED&I issues, is actually being open-minded enough to welcome people's differences rather than trying to put everybody into a pigeonhole. So that's one issue. The second thing is combining science and art. I think, I've said this so many times, but I'll say it again, like innovation is in the grey area of the Venn diagram where one side is science and that's the future where people collaborate, not keeping ourselves cut off.
Be mindful of time and making, I'm sure everyone probably wants to have a drink. If I can just ask one final question of each of you. If you wanted people to go away today and do one thing, one action, one change, what would you ask them to do? I'll start with you, Aileen.
I think this will just stick into my emotional intelligence, I suppose, because I'm very passionate about making people feel welcome. Let's not make it feel like it's just for people that have gone to university. It needs to be an open door for people that can actually go and have an apprenticeship or have relatable models. You know, I've heard a lot of mentoring being mentioned. So it's not a one-trick pony. There's so many avenues that can, you know, young people can come into the energy sector. Sorry, I know you said one thing, but those are the few things. Thank you.
I think for minorities, speak up because you may be shy, because you feel different, but speak up anyway, because you will inspire somebody else who feels like they are different. And then also, you know, we're all in this room we all have a reason for being here, an ED&I reason for being here, but let's think about all the people who aren't in this room, because they're the people that need to be convinced.
Talk to young people, talk, actively listen to them. And don't be afraid to talk about all sorts of subjects, and we'll have the right people going through.
And if I can be indulgent and give my one call for action, it would be data, data, data. I know we haven't really touched on it, but it is so important that you gather data, you analyse your data, you measure your data, because you can't make change without having that data there to analyse and decide what change you want to make. So on that note, thank you very much to all of my panellists today, and we hope that you have had some takeaways from our discussion.
Thank you very much to our last panel. So just a couple more minutes before I let you go and have a drink. I'm aware that I'm standing between you and that, so I will be very brief. We've heard a lot today. I think we've got a lot of food for thought. I think the words that struck me was it's about support, but it's about organisational culture, and it's about representation. And if we don't get this right, then things are going to go very wrong for our sector, the energy sector. So this is crucial that we get this right. it's great, just echoing some of the comments that have just been made. It's great to see some faces in this room that I know are either already in or are moving into positions of power, but there aren't enough of them. We need to have the voices that we're listening to heard by the people who can make the changes. So and I know Rob agrees with me on this one. We discussed it at lunchtime. I think the next thing we need to do in terms of events is get those people into a room and have voices heard by them, not just by us. So that's what I'd like you guys to take away with you and sort it out, please. We'll do what we can. I'd like to say thank you to all of our chairs and speakers today. And thank you to the UKERC and the Energy Institute staff teams who organised this and brought it all together. And thanks to all of you for participating actively in the day. On your way out, could you leave your lanyards and your name badges on the registration desk? But please don't do that just yet. Please do stay with us and have a drink and a few canapes and a bit more chat before you go. Thank you all very much.